John and I were there together for the 4 years. And I guess I had the privilege of, other than George and Ann, working the longest. But we were close friends. I played basketball with him on the basketball team. And we got separated during college. I went my way, he went his. I came back through Austin, Texas in 1973 to go down to San Antonio to go at Air Force pilot training. And John happened to be living in Austin, and I found out from another friend of ours that where he was living, and I stopped in that night and spent some time with him on my way down there. Our paths crossed again back after I came back to Austin in 1975 to fly out there at Bergstrom. And we met a couple of times, but I didn't really get to know John well until we met up again about 5 years ago. We got together and met up and had some time spent together speaking with each other and talking about old times. We shared a lot of memories from 1967 in the class there at Burnham. But I want to share with you something here tonight. Over the last year and a half that I've spent with John, we've had a lot of quiet times, a lot of talks as I work with him going through to Texas Oncology on Wednesday afternoons. And I just want you to know that there's a part of John that probably a lot of you don't know. He became very spiritual in his last year and a half of life, and we had a lot of conversations, biblical conversations, concerning texts of the Bible and what God had in store for him. And I'd just like to share with you that the Bible is a book that changes a lot of our presuppositions, a lot of our assumptions are turned upside down, and our categories, we don't even have categories for them. And one of those texts in the Bible comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, where it says, it is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. In other words, there's deep things that we can learn here during this time of our mourning that we wouldn't ever have the opportunity to learn. And that's some of the things that John and I talked about. I was probably one of the few guys to tell him that it was a blessing as to what was happening in his life, because he had the opportunity to make his relationships deeper, stronger. He found more love. He found more time to share in the things that he cared about, and those things grew proportionally. And there are many gifts that John found in this tragedy. And there is always something beautiful in finding a gift where we only thought to find tragedy. And John found a lot of beautiful things in his time as he was diagnosed with cancer. He built relationships that he never would have had. If you could have seen him with the nurses there at Texas Oncology, he was quite the guy. He would bring candy for them, other things to share with them, and the women down there and the nurses down there just loved him. The relationships he had were made stronger and deeper. They became more precious than he could have ever had otherwise. He was able to capture life more fully, treating every new day as a gift. We take things so for granted for ourselves as we live this life. And John had the opportunity, knowing that his life was going to be brief, and he took every opportunity to make it full. The things that were important became more apparent and more focused, and he came to understand the brevity of his life and enjoyed more of the simpler things that life offered. One of the things that I did, I was in the hospital room the Friday prior to John's death, and we had spent quite a bit of time in the hospital that week. And there were a lot of people coming in and out, goings, talking, sharing. But John and I had a special times together in the car where we'd grab each other's hand and we'd bow our heads and we'd have prayer and we'd cry with each other and talk about life and death. It was a sweet time for me, and it was a sweet time for John. And that Friday, there was a little time that week when the family was there and friends would come in and out of the hospital to really share or talk with John. But that Friday afternoon, I went over to his bed, held his hand, came down and whispered in his ear. I said to John, "Trust Christ, trust Christ, trust Christ." They weren't empty words for John because we had spent a year and a half talking about what it meant to trust Christ. We understood that trusting Christ for his life that he lived that we could never live, it meant for the death that we deserved that he took upon himself, and for overcoming death through his resurrection, so that by trusting him, by trusting Christ, we too would overcome death and the sting of death, and for the eternal life promised to those who would trust in him. John looked up at me and he smiled. And I smiled back, and that was the last time I had seen him. Let's bow our heads in prayer.